What up, Wizards? It's Dev from The Place, and we have all just recently returned from beyond the stratosphere during Edge of Eternities preview season. We were up there for a while, but now that we've come back down to Earth, the question is, what decks do we actually even build in this bold new post-rotation world if we actually want to win games in Standard? Well, I'm pretty sure the answer to that question is just basically the same Dimir decks we were playing before rotation happened and the set came out, so that's a little bit sad. But if you actually want to have real fun in Standard with brand new cards, there are tons of powerful new options at your disposal, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Here are all the decks that I'm building for EOE Standard.
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back to talk about some decks. I'm working on 11 of them in total right now in EOE Standard, but we're really just going to focus on like 6 of them today and kind of tell you what I'm cooking up just a little bit. I just don't have as much time as I used to in between seasons to do like 5 or 6 deck techs the way I want to, you know? It's only 2 months in between releases now, and we'll probably be in Spider-Man spoilers for real in like 2 or 3 weeks here, so I just can't get all the decks out that I want to anymore. So I figured a good way to do things nowadays might be to just tell you everything I'm working on at the beginning of the season. We'll kind of go from there because all 6 decks that we're going to talk about today are currently on a Patreon poll I just released like an hour before I sat down to record this video. So I think it'll be live for a few days. If you're interested in any of these decks, you can throw $1 a month in the Patreon pot and vote for any one of them to be our first deck tech of the season. So just wanted to let you know you could do that, but let's go ahead and get into the big stuff I'm working on right now. Now this first one, I'm calling Orzhov Death and Taxes, even though realistically there aren't enough taxation effects in Standard right now to truly call it that, but it's still going to end up feeling like our traditional Orzhov D&T list. Lightstall Inquisitor is a card that I'm really interested in, and I've kind of made that point enough times during previous season. You know how good I think this card is, and now I want to know if it really is that good. There are a lot of ways to get cheese out of this card, especially in the early game where it's easiest to leverage the tempo advantage that it's giving you. For that reason, I think that it might go best in like a blue-white tempo shell of some kind that includes a lot of small or flash creatures, plus counter magic and instant speed removal, traditional stuff. As far as a small ball tempo deck goes, I think this is wonderful for your one drop in that pile. But again, I want to try it in Orzhov because I think that it's got some of the least embarrassing to play and just overall most powerful 2 and 3 drops in the format for a deck like this. In Orzhov, we might not be able to leverage this, stumbling block that we're putting in front of our opponent as quickly as some other aggro decks might, but we can still go like turn 1 Lightstall Inquisitor into turn 2 Deep Cavern Bat, and then we have completely butchered any plan that they may have had for the early or even mid-game, depending, right? But we can also play just normally powerful mid-range cards like Preacher of the Schism, or we can play Biza in the 4-drop slot, which is not a taxation effect, but it does sort of tax them for having more creatures than you. It's all right, but still, I think that Orzhov mid-range really right now just has some of the best curvation it could possibly have, and even if you don't curve out perfectly, you've still got some of the better removal in the format. Even with the exit of some of Black's really, really reliable removal, we still have some new stuff I want to try, like Seam Rip, which might be like the best removal spell in Edge of Eternities. A lot of people talking about it right now. That's for a darn good reason, but there's also even stuff like Depressurize, which I at least want to bring to tryouts. We'll see if it'll make the team or not, but one way or the other, there's a lot of cool removal that I want to try out from Edge of Eternities, but Orzhov, even after rotation and even discounting Edge of Eternities as a set, just take it out of the equation, Orzhov still has some pretty good removal, like Get Lost, for instance. So I think this could be just a nice little kind of half mid-range, half tempo deck in Orzhov that, especially with some of the early drops available to it, could be really strong. You could also get some pretty decent creature synergies going, things like Cecil seem like a non-bow with Biza, but you could have already flipped over your Cecil, at which point it doesn't matter. But if you've lost a little too much life to your Cecil, or maybe your Dark Confident, which you could also be playing, then suddenly Biza will help you get some of that life back, which could be really important. There's also Enduring Innocence in a deck like this. Seems really, really good. You get card draw off the Fish from Biza, Preacher of the Schism, Lightstall Inquisitor, Deep Cavern Bat. Like most of your creatures are going to trigger Enduring Innocence, including more copies of Enduring Innocence. So now now you have a powerful mid-range deck with good creatures on every spot of the curve, card draw, and removal, and traditionally, that signals a really successful mid-range deck. And there's even more options for a deck like this. Overlord of the Mistmoors, Shoot the Sheriff looks like a pretty good post-rotation removal spell, so if anything, one of the problems with this thing is having like too many good options for it, but we'll see how a traditional mid-range deck can function in today's standard. There is a lot of value going around, and there's even some fast decks that remain, so, we'll see. But again, just about every slot in this deck looks like it can be covered by a really powerful Magic card. So again, if there is just a mid-range deck that's out trying to like snowball value into some crazy late game play or something, this might be one of the better options in standard. But speaking of those decks that like to snowball a little bit of value until a huge late game play that just deletes the opponent's face, let's talk about Worldsire Reanimator real quick, because Famished Worldsire looks like it's just a commander card, but this already made my standard list for a reason. I think this has plenty to do, and it's a lot better as a reanimation target than it might appear, because the obvious argument against it is like, well, we got Valgavoth, like a couple of other big guys, right? But I think this could provide even more value than Valgavoth, and Valgavoth doesn't usually win the game on the spot, depending on what you're doing, but not too often, whereas I think Famished Worldsire could do it the turn you reanimate it, and that could happen as early as turn 4, depending on your setup. But once you get late into the game, it is much more likely to actually pop off. Now, obviously, you just play like Zombify in this deck and try to get in by turn 4, but if you either don't win the game with the initial Zombify, or you have to wait until turn 6 or 7 to Zombify the Worldsire, this is the rare kind of Reanimator deck where it actually gets better and better to reanimate your guy. I mean, how often do you have to reanimate your guy a second time? Kind of often, right? Well, Famished Worldsire basically guarantees that the second time you have to reanimate him, you're going to be paid off by winning the game. You've got stuff too that's brand new you can play in this deck, like Seed Ship Broodtender, which looks phenomenal. It may be a little bit more expensive to reanimate a guy than, say, a Valgavoth's Faithful, but Valgavoth's Faithful doesn't have a particularly sturdy body, and it specifically doesn't have that ETB mill condition that Broodtender does, and that could be obviously very good in a deck like this. But as far as like enter the battlefield mill some cards, creatures go, we got a lot of really good ones. Aftermath Analyst comes to mind as like probably the best thing to play in this deck, because it also has that synergy with the Splendid Reclamation mode. Famished Worldsire's going to be sacrificing some lands. Just get him back with this. But there's also that guy from Final Fantasy. I think his name's Town Greeter. He's just a 2-drop that comes into play mill 4, get a land back. So you should be able to mill enough cards into your graveyard that you can hit a Worldsire pretty quickly. There's also, Overlord of the Baelmerk, which is probably the most powerful way of milling a Worldsire into your yard while still being able to play a good card. So, you could also play black cards that allow you to discard cards into your yard too, just in case a Worldsire ends up into your hand. There's also, a Smuggler's Surprise route that you could take. I don't think you play both Zombify and Surprise in the same deck. And it remains to be seen whether or not Smugglers or Zombify is the best way to get a Worldsire down, but one way or the other, I think that both of them could potentially be great options for playing Worldsire. And then once you do that, you just sacrifice all your lands. You probably get just as many or maybe even more lands than you sacrifice to it, depending. And then it has this enormous power that you can either, fling at somebody if you want to, or more likely, you just take advantage of all the landfall triggers you get when it enters the battlefield. You can use stuff like Tannic, Memorial Ensign, he's brand new. Or you could play, Iridescent Vinelash or Sabatender, whatever, in order to get these triggers. You could also play Deserts, perhaps, to get the triggers when they enter the battlefield and zap your opponent. So you could really, even just by having 4 or 5 lands interplay, when you Worldsire, you could just about OTK most opponents, depending on what lands you're getting back and how many of these pingers that you have in play. And of course, I guess you could always use, landfall effects that put creatures into play. You could use landfall creatures that get huge when lands come into play. We have a bunch of different options for that in the format right now, but I think those decks perform better when you actually build around those effects. We are building mostly around Famished Worldsire here, and I'm just not sure that you have enough slots in your deck to include, like, oh, Tifa and Mossborn Hydra go in this. I'm not sure that they actually do. Then we want to focus on our Reanimator plan and, play some landfall effects, but maybe not as many as you would expect. I do think, like, Bristly Bill shows up in here to make sure that all your creatures get huge when Worldsire's ability resolves, right? And for what it's worth, I think just a turn 4 Worldsire is a pretty good play, considering it's got this massive ward on it. Your opponent might not be able to do too much about it. Even if they can, they have to devote, like, their entire turn to doing it. So One way or the other, again, I'm not convinced either. Just like you might not be that this is the best reanimation target in Standard, but it's definitely one that I want to try out because it's got a lot of different ways of approaching Reanimator than like your average Reanimator list where you're just like, oh, yawn until I can reanimate Valgavoth, and when I do that, the opponent yawns. I've seen it 1,000 times. At least this has some sort of huge potential to it, and if you can get to your World Sire without actually having to reanimate it, if you get late enough in the game to actually just cast the card, and it's good then too, so... Again, you might never get late enough in the game to cast a Valgavoth, right? So a lot of things I really like about this, and there's plenty of ways to build around it. Again, the problem is there might be too many good cards to include in the deck. And next one I want to talk about is Tanic, man. Another card that looks really good in Commander, specifically the mono red Tanic. I know there's 2 in the set, and I just mentioned the other one, but as far as commanders in the set go that look amazing in EDH to hang out in your command zone and brew around and blah, yeah, Tanic, sure, but I am more excited about this for Standard than I think a lot of people are. It's not as easy to make this statement with Twin Maw Stormbrood kind of flying around Standard right now. It's one of the more popular removal spells, but even with that, I still think that 5 toughness is a great benchmark for the Standard environment, so I like that about it. I think it might be stickier than we think it is right now. It usually has to hang out for a turn to have any real value in a game, but, if you've got 7 mana, you can throw it down and immediately use it, which is a play that, no one's talking about, and it's also a play I think will be pretty good a lot of the time if you get to that point in the game. Now, obviously, a big red deck looks phenomenal with this, but we do have some pretty good, artifact creatures you could play along with it. Darksteel Colossus isn't Standard right now. That ain't bad. Extinguisher Battleship. I've already brought up this interaction a couple of times in previous season, and I think it might be ridiculously good. With Tanic, it doesn't kill the Tanic, it blows up something else when it comes into play, and eventually you might even get it stationed up. Who knows? So I think Battleship is good enough, but there's also weird creatures in the artifact suite, Threefold Thunderhulk is a weird one. It enters the battlefield, you get 3 tokens. It attacks, you get 3 tokens. It'll do both of those things the turn that you played if you have a Tanic out. That's pretty nasty, but obviously there's a lot of red creatures just in Standard alone that this works insanely well with. And again, you don't have to play embarrassing cards. You could always play Overlord of the Boiler Bilges if you felt like doing that. And then again, you get the ETB trigger and the attacks trigger on the same turn. And if you can get in with Boiler Bilges too, with some actual combat damage, you just did well over half of their starting life total in one guy. Sunspine Lynx is also a creature you might be playing anyway. That goes really well with this because, we're mono red, likely. We're just playing mountains, dog. We might have a couple of colorless lands in there or a differently named land or 2 in red, but for the most part, it's mountains up and down, so we can play this and hit them for 4 when we warp it in, and then just play it again on the next turn to lava axe them or something, and all that seems really, really decent to be able to do, again, half your opponent's starting life total just in the one Sunspine Lynx. But there are a lot of big red creatures that, again, you might be able to slip into your deck that work with this, that you don't really think about so often. There's Trumpeting Carnosaur, which could be a decent early game removal spell if you needed one, while still being a great card to warp off of Tanic, because you're casting it, it's got an ETB trigger that lets you discover. And so you get the discover trigger when you warp it into play. It can attack for 7 trample damage that turn. And then when it goes to exile, cool, I'll just play it again next turn and get my 5 discover again. And creatures I control have haste, so whether I'm warping them in or casting them out of exile, I can just attack with them the same turn they come into play. That's good with all the creatures I've already mentioned, but it's especially good with the Trumpeting Carnosaur. It's also especially good with a Drakoseth Maul of Flame. This one you probably haven't thought about in a few months, since Foundations came out, but this actually used to be a decently playable card in Standard back in the day when we could reanimate it and stuff, and it was one of the better targets for doing so, but has been pretty quiet since Foundations came out. But Tanic might be the deck for it, man. You're getting a ton of value the turn this comes into play, so long as it has haste, and you can only pay 3 mana for it. I'd say it's a pretty good Magic card. Not to mention you've got decent removal like a Braid, which might be, even more important in the upcoming format. A lot of artifacts to look out for, and the aforementioned Twin Maw Stormbrood, fight fire with fire, you can use it on their guys too. So again, Big Red doesn't look like the absolute worst deck in the world, and with Tanic at the helm, I think that it can definitely do, some, let me say this, some more explosive things than it's used to doing. You know, these last few months, we've been playing stuff like Clive in Big Red and being like, okay, you know, we get to 6 mana, we'll be doing okay. Well, we no longer have to say, like, well, this Big Red deck is great if we get to 6 mana, if we get to 7 mana. Now all we really have to do is get to 4 mana. That is a lot better. But let's move on from this one and talk about maybe the jankiest deck on this bowl. Certainly the jankiest deck on this bowl. I just gotta let you know, but it's the one that in some ways I'm most excited about. This is the Biotech Specialist / Weapons Manufacturing combo. I don't know if it's really a combo so much as it is just good synergy. Tech Spec is just a 2-drop that makes a lander token when he comes into play, but he has this incredible line of text that says whenever you sack an artifact, 2 damage to everybody's face, except yours. Your face is fine. But Weapons Manufacturing basically says that whenever you play an artifact, you get another little artifact called munitions or whatever it is. And when that artifact goes to the graveyard, you get to deal 2 damage to any target. Nasty. So if you have both cards on the table at the same time and you sack an artifact, you deal 2 to the face and 2 to anything so long as that artifact was a munition. That technically means you only have to sacrifice 5 artifacts in order to just kill your opponent from their starting life total at least. Not bad. But if you have extra copies of any of these things out, because, you know, they work in multiples, both of them do, well, then suddenly it'll take even fewer artifacts to completely, you know, obliterate your opponent's life total. So that could be great, but it could also be a little bit slow. It could also be a little bit easily interacted with, whatever. But that said, there's a lot of artifacts you can play in this environment that you might just be slotting into your deck anyway. And specifically, there are a lot of aggressive and efficient ones, which you kind of want in this deck, because not only do you have to deplete the opponent's life total fairly quickly, you want to have already started on their life total once you get the 2 cards into play that make the deck. So sure, but you also want cheap artifacts because, you know, both these things cost 2 mana, which seems cheap, but if you're going to have both of them out and you're going to start rocking and rolling with them, you can't really do that until turn 3, maybe even 4, which is a little bit slow even for post-ban, post-rotation standards. So again, you want your aggressive artifacts to be as efficient as possible, and that's where things like Ginger Brute come in. We actually have some decently costed artifact creatures, not just Genji, but a couple of things we just got. Like, what is it, Rustbelt Harvester or something? You know, there's like a 1-mana 2/1 red artifact creature as well in this set that can make copies of itself, which is especially good with, you know, Biotech Specialist at least. So there's a lot of really cool things that you can use to get aggressive in your artifacts deck and still have plenty of cheap artifacts to actually sacrifice. You could also make this deck jund, like maybe it wants Umbral Caller Zealot or other effects that allow you to sacrifice artifacts, but honestly, I don't know that you have to play black in this deck. You might be able to get by just by playing a bunch of treasures and other things in this color combination that will allow you to sack artifacts, and there are a few. So ultimately, I am really excited to dig into this deck, but I don't know that I have all the faith in the world in it. That said, it's one of those decks that's either kind of a fun meme to put together, play with your friends at F&M or whatever, or it's actually a really, really strong deck, and I'm not sure which one it is now, but one way or the other, I'm excited to play it. This sounds like I'm done with this deck, but I actually have one more thing to say. If you are going to make the deck Jund, there's some good stuff you can play, man. Not only Umbral Caller Zealot to sack stuff, but you can play Grim Bauble, which is really, really cheap, kills a creature, and can eventually be sacrificed to itself, but there's not just that. There's also Dubious Delicacy, which is brand new from EOE, and I would not be surprised if you've never seen this card. But yeah, this can also sack itself to deal 3 to the opponent. So if you have a Biotech Specialist out, well, then suddenly you're dealing 5 to the opponent for a couple of damage, and that could be good, especially considering it too is a removal spell when it comes into play. So again, the deck has a ton of pretty good-looking options, at least in my opinion. But next we'll look at a deck that I can't really call jank, but I will call an underdog. It's Blue-Black Mill. Now, I know most people are thinking about building Blue-White Mill with that new thing that allows you to mill cards equal to your life total. That seems like a lot of fun, and I've seen people too talk about like a Hope S-Time Raise the Pass deck, which seems good, but I don't want to raise your hopes too much about that list. I think it might be fun, but we'll see about it. I actually think the best way to mill cards in Standard post-rotation, post-Edge of Eternities, is actually Dimir, because we get Singularity Rupture. This looks okay to me, for real. It actually does. 6 mana is kind of a lot for a sweeper, but maybe decks won't be so aggressive, especially post-bans. We've already seen a lot more mid-range pop up in Standard, so I think you have a lot more breathing room nowadays, especially after rotation, to cast this card. And if you do get it, you delete half their library, which seems like it just wins the game alongside River Churn Churn Monument. If you go this on turn whatever and just wipe the board into River Churn on the next turn and just exhaust it or something, and you should have enough mana if you cast a Singularity Rupture to do that, well then you win, right? Because you milled half their library, and then River Churn will mill cards equal to the cards in their graveyard. So unless they were able to, delete their graveyard and just exile it or something, then you probably got it sewed up, Chief. And Dimir has, as usual, enough removal and counter magic to actually get to the point in the game where you can cast stuff not only like Singularity Rupture, but like the 6 mana Adventure Mode on Jadur, which we also have available to us. So again, I know a lot of people are into Azorius, and I can see the various reasons why. We just got a shiny new toy for that color combination, but I think people are forgetting, like, Singularity Rupture is also a brand new toy, and it's just like, we're not even going to take it out of the box. We're just going to put it up on the shelf like, oh, I don't care about that. This is the crappy gift that we got for our birthday this year. And actually, I think that we might be neglecting it's one of those things where, like, you put it on the shelf when you get it as a birthday present when you're 12 years old, and 20 years later you come back to it and you're like, actually, this was really cool. So I just don't want to have to wait 20 years. I think we should recognize right now that Rupture is a fantastic card, and we've got a lot of good cards in a package to go around it. We've got like Deadly Cover Up as well if we want to play multiple sweepers in the deck, and I think we might if we want to play a faster sweeper than Rupture. Cover Up is good, and it'll allow us to kind of neuter our opponent's deck, which could be really important right now. So again, I know not everybody gets excited about mill, and especially not like control mill, right? But even without Jace in the format, I think we've still got plenty of options for a deck like this, and I want to try it out. I think it could be strong. And finally, we have the Lab Ship deck. Synthesizer Lab Ship. Every time I look at it, I think, so this is either just like a 1 mana 2/2 you have to do like too much work for, probably, or it's the best card in the set. I'm not sure, man. It's definitely not Corey Steelcutter. Like, it won't give you a 2/2 flyer every turn that sticks around. The monk will stick around, but in this case, it at least protects against like sorcery speed removal and especially sweepers. It gives you great sweeper protection, and it's also really, really efficient to just get on the table in the first place. Synergizes with itself because if you get 2 copies down, they just kind of see each other. So as long as they're both charged to at least 2 station, they'll turn each other into 2/2 flyers, which again could be at the very least good against people who are relying on sweepers to do the bulk of their lifting for them, removal wise. It's also good to kind of throw into these existing blue-white Zoetic Glyph decks, and we just got, Nutrient Block, an indestructible 1-drop artifact that goes really well with Zoetic Glyph, so we can, relive the Scissors deck from a couple of years ago, the Ensoul Artifact deck from a couple of years ago, which was never, like, super amazing in Standard, but it was always really, really, fun and kind of solid for the most part. So, with Zoe Glyph and Nutrient Block being a fun combo, we can kind of pour it into the deck. I think the Lab Ship might be okay. We can even put a Glyph on the Lab Ship, and suddenly now we have like 7 power, 2 of which flies like every single turn, and that's not terrible deal either. Plus, we have really good 1-drops like Spyglass Siren, which gives us an artifact that we can turn into a flyer and a creature that can help charge the Lab Ship, so that seems like that's a shoe-in. But then the problem becomes, like, what's our second color? Because we probably need a second color. It could be black. We could use the aforementioned Grim Bauble in that deck as well, because now we have a 1-drop removal spell that becomes a 2/2 flyer. That's great. But, in white, we have, like, Dusk Rose Reliquary, which is, again, a removal spell that we can turn into a 2/2 flyer for just 1 mana. And it shouldn't be too hard to find, like, a map token or something laying around we can sack to it. We could also try Is It, because Pinnacle Emissary looks really, really good in the stack. We're playing a bunch of, like, cheap artifacts. Let's please play Emissary, but I'm just not too sure. We could even go Jeskai, but I don't think the mana looks particularly good for that. It's the same reason I don't know that I want to go to Azorius, because I'm not sure the mana looks too good. Even if you can get like Novice Inspector in your deck, the mana looks pretty bad. So I'm just not sure exactly which direction we go with this color-wise, because, again, just like the first couple of decks we talked about, they're just kind of too many good, efficient options for a deck like this. And when you find yourself in that territory, you probably have yourself a strong deck. And in this case, it's not just that there's a bunch of strong cards that I want to throw in the deck and it's going to end up being, a 72-card deck that I have to cut down. It's that plus the fact that most of the cards I want to play in the deck are like 1 or 2 mana. So not only are the cards in for the deck like good looking, but they're also extremely efficient. And again, when you run into that issue, I think you might have a really good deck on your hands. It's just all about how you actually build it, what cards you keep, what cards you cut. And I'm interested in that process too. That is all of the decks that I'm going to cover like sort of in depth today, but there's a bunch more that I'm working on. I'm working on like, Black White Aristocrats, obviously, because we got Umbral Collar Zealot, but we've also got Timeline Color, which allows us, these 2 cards together to do these kind of loops. If we have a creature that deals damage to the opponent and gains us life whenever a creature dies, and maybe we have a creature that gains a life whenever a creature comes into play under our control, well, then suddenly we can do these loops where we just win the game, like pay the black and a 2-life warp cost like 3 or 4 or 5 times in the same turn. By sacking Timeline Color to Umbral Collar Zealot, and then we can just kill our opponent with like a Vengeful Blood Witch or something like that. And that seems like Aristocrats to me. So I want to build that deck, of course, you know me, but there's weirder stuff too, like Mono Black Discard with Entropic Battlecruiser. Having a Megrim for discard decks looks like it's a pretty good thing to do in Standard right now. And also, Ouroboros. I want to build Mono Green with that card because I think Ouroboros might be sneakily the new Sheoldred. Like a 4-drop that if you don't answer it, it just runs away with the game, And unlike Sheoldred, this actually kind of does something the turn that you play it. So that could be really good too for like mono green stompy decks. I'm also working on just a straight up Pinnacle Emissary deck in Izzet. And I'm working on an Oops All Colorless deck because I think it got some of the best options it's gotten in the last few sets, which is saying something. It keeps picking up good options. So again, I'm working on a bunch of stuff right now, but if you're interested in any of the main decks that we covered, I'll again let you know that we got a Patreon poll going on right now until Friday night as I release this, that, you can vote for any of these decks in. So if any of these strike your fancy and you want to see them as the first deck tech of the season, and I might only get to 2 or 3 decks this season, that's how short the season looks, then go on over to Patreon, throw $1 in the Patreon pot, and vote for any of these decks. It would be much appreciated for sure. Patreon helps out more than any other thing that I do as a YouTuber. It's the whole reason that I can continue being a YouTuber. Really, it's how I pay my mortgage and stuff, and it's how I buy supplies and whatnot for the channel when I need them. We needed a new camera last year. We needed a new mic a couple of years ago. We needed a new light because both of my stage lights went out, so we had to get a new ring light, and all of that is, because of Patreon. That's why I can do those things when I need to do them. So just letting you guys know, if you're already patrons, I really appreciate you. And if you consider becoming one or end up becoming one, I appreciate you too, because I really could not do this without that website. So thank you so much. If you end up, participating in this poll, that means a lot to me. And these polls are more important than ever. I use important loosely because, we're playing a card game. How important is it really to the history of the world? But in any case, these are more important nowadays because the release schedule is so tight and things are so close together, and I really only get to do a few deck techs a season nowadays. I want to squeeze in as many as I want, but it's also important that you guys get to pick the ones you really want to see the most. So again, Patreon helps with that. Check that out. But do all the other YouTube stuff. I just appreciate you still being here. If you're watching the video at this point, like the thing. It's the button shaped like a thumb. You can always sub to the sandwich. Thanks for all our new subs. I noticed that over Edge of Eternities preview season, we got about as many new subs as we did during Final Fantasy preview season. So thanks. Welcome to the channel, man. This squad's a good place to be. I have one of the better communities on YouTube. Some of the nicest people in the comments section. I don't know what I did to deserve it, but I appreciate it a lot. So, thanks for being part of that team. But anyway, y'all, do all the other stuff. Anything you can think of, I guess share the video around. Do people still do that? I don't know if people still even subscribe to YouTubers, but even if you don't, maybe there's just once. That would make me happy. But anyway, y'all, just let me know how you felt about all this in the comments section. What decks you want to see the most this season down there, what you're working on. It's a good time to put all of our heads together at the very beginning of the season and see what we think is powerful here. But anyway, that's all I've got for now. So guess I'm donezo over this one, so I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.